I didn't lose my privacy all at once. It vanished one post at a time, until millions of strangers knew things about me that even my closest friends didn't. The day I found out, I was standing in line for coffee, half awake, scrolling without thinking. That's when I saw my face on someone else's screen. My name wasn't there, but the story was unmistakably mine. My childhood trauma, my medical scare, my worst mistake, rewritten for likes, comments, and strangers' sympathy. And the person who shared it? Someone I trusted more than anyone. This wasn't just an argument. This was a privacy betrayal that rewired how I saw people, relationships, and the internet forever. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. People overshare all the time, right? That's what everyone says now, that it's normal, that if it's online, it's fair game. But nothing prepares you for the hollow feeling of realizing your life has become someone else's content. The worst part wasn't the post itself, it was the comments. Strangers debating my choices, laughing at moments I cried through, giving advice about a life they didn't understand. I felt stripped, exposed, small. This wasn't just internet drama. This was deeply personal internet drama, the kind that crawls into your real life and refuses to leave. Friends started acting weird. Coworkers looked at me differently. Even people who meant well asked questions I never gave permission to answer. I confronted her that night, calmly, carefully. She laughed. She said I should be grateful. She said people related to my story. She said I was being dramatic. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. This wasn't ignorance. This was a sharenting issue disguised as care. A conflict story disguised as honesty, and I was the unwilling main character. I didn't scream. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't rush to defend myself online. Instead, I went quiet. Because when someone shows you they're willing to trade your dignity for attention, reacting emotionally is exactly what they expect and exactly what they benefit from. So I watched. I listened. I learned. I learned how people curate sympathy, how narratives are twisted, how easily truth becomes entertainment. And slowly, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it, loud, explosive, messy. This was about control, about taking back what had been taken from me, about letting karma do its work, with just a little help from silence and timing. What she didn't know, what no one online knew, was that every post, every comment, every lie she shared was building a record, a pattern, a trail. And trails always lead somewhere. I didn't plan to destroy her life. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. If you think this couldn't happen to you, that you'd never trust the wrong person, that your private life is safe as long as you don't post it, I used to think that too, and that was my first mistake. Before all of this, my life was quiet in the best way. I wasn't famous. I wasn't chasing attention. I worked a normal job, paid my bills on time, and kept my circle small on purpose. I believed privacy was a form of self-respect. What happened in my life belonged to the people who earned the right to hear it, and she was one of them. We met years earlier, at a time when both of us were trying to rebuild after messy chapters. We bonded fast, the kind of connection that feels safe because it's built on shared vulnerability. Late-night conversations, long voice notes, confessions you don't even say out loud to yourself. I told her things I had never put into words before. That's how trust starts, quietly. She was always online, though, posting stories, writing long captions, turning ordinary moments into mini narratives. People loved her for it. She had that tone, relatable, raw, emotionally intelligent, the kind that made strangers comment, "This feels like my life." At first, I admired it. When she talked about sharing her truth, I supported her. When she hinted that maybe one day she'd write about real experiences, I didn't think twice. I assumed there was an unspoken line, that some things were sacred. That assumption was naive. Looking back, the signs were there. She'd repeat my words almost verbatim when talking to others. She'd test reactions, dropping vague details to see how people responded. When I hesitated, she'd say, "It helps people feel less alone." That phrase became her shield. I was going through a rough period then, emotionally fragile, juggling family pressure, a relationship ending, and a personal issue I didn't want attached to my name. I shared it with her in confidence, explicitly. I remember saying, "Please don't tell anyone this." She promised. That's why the privacy betrayal cut so deep. It wasn't just that my story went public, it was that it crossed a line I clearly drew. What she framed as honesty felt like theft. Soon, small things started to feel off. She'd ask oddly specific questions, not out of concern but curiosity. She took mental notes. I didn't realize it then, but my life was becoming raw material. This wasn't just a friendship drifting apart. It was the slow formation of a conflict story, one I didn't know I was part of yet. And when the posts started, indirect at first, I still gave her the benefit of the doubt. No names, no faces, just someone I know. But the details were too accurate, too intimate. That's how internet drama really begins, not with explosions, but with plausibility. People close to me started asking questions. "Is that about you?" I laughed it off, said no, said I was imagining things. Because admitting the truth meant facing something terrifying, that someone I trusted was benefiting from my pain. This wasn't an accident. This was a sharenting issue disguised as care, a conflict story disguised as honesty, and I was the unwilling main character. I didn't scream. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't rush to defend myself online. Instead, I went quiet. Because when someone shows you they're willing to trade your dignity for attention, reacting emotionally is exactly what they expect and exactly what they benefit from. So I watched, I listened, I learned. I learned how people curate sympathy, how narratives are twisted, how easily truth becomes entertainment, and slowly, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine it, loud, explosive, messy. This was about control, about taking back what had been taken from me, about letting karma do its work, with just a little help from silence and timing. What she didn't know, what no one online knew, was that every post, every comment, every lie she shared was building a record, a pattern, a trail, and trails always lead somewhere. I didn't plan to destroy her life. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. If you think this couldn't happen to you, that you'd never trust the wrong person, that your private life is safe as long as you don't post it, I used to think that too, and that was my first mistake. Before all of this, my life was quiet in the best way. I wasn't famous, I wasn't chasing attention. I worked a normal job, paid my bills on time, and kept my circle small on purpose. I believed privacy was a form of self-respect. What happened in my life belonged to the people who earned the right to hear it, and she was one of them. We met years earlier, at a time when both of us were trying to rebuild after messy chapters. We bonded fast, the kind of connection that feels safe because it's built on shared vulnerability. Late-night conversations, long voice notes, confessions you don't even say out loud to yourself. I told her things I had never put into words before. That's how trust starts, quietly. She was always online, though, posting stories, writing long captions, turning ordinary moments into mini narratives. people loved her for it. She had that tone, relatable, raw, emotionally intelligent, the kind that made strangers comment, "This feels like my life." At first, I admired it. When she talked about sharing her truth, I supported her. When she hinted that maybe one day she'd write about real experiences, I didn't think twice. I assumed there was an unspoken line, that some things were sacred. That assumption was naive. Looking back, the signs were there. She'd repeat my words almost verbatim when talking to others. She'd test reactions, dropping vague details to see how people responded. When I hesitated, she'd say, "It helps people feel less alone." That phrase became her shield. I was going through a rough period then, emotionally fragile, juggling family. I didn't confront her right away. That's what surprises people the most when I tell this story. Instead, I started paying attention. Once you notice the pattern, you can't unsee it. Her posts became more frequent, more detailed, still anonymous on the surface, but intimate in a way that felt invasive. She talked about a friend who struggled with boundaries, someone close who made a bad decision years ago, a woman I love who didn't heal the right way. Each story landed perfectly with her audience. The comments poured in, advice, judgment, sympathy, applause for her bravery. Meanwhile, I felt like I was slowly being erased, reduced to a character in her narrative. My real emotions didn't matter, only the version of me that fit her content did. This is how internet drama actually works. It's not loud at first, it's subtle, polite, wrapped in good intentions. She never tagged me, never named me. That was her defense, plausible deniability. If I ever complained, she could say, "If the shoe fits, that's not my fault." Classic gaslighting. I tested the waters once, casually. I said some of her posts felt uncomfortably familiar. She smiled and told me I was projecting, that I should ask myself why I felt seen. That's when I understood the manipulation. She wasn't just sharing, she was curating a conflict story where she was always the thoughtful narrator and I was the cautionary tale. The sharenting issue became impossible to ignore. She was sharing details about my life that I never would have chosen to put online, not because I was ashamed, but because some things deserve privacy, context, consent, and consent was never asked. What hurt most was how calculated it felt. She knew exactly which parts of my story would perform well, the pain, the vulnerability, the moments that made people comment, "I went through the same thing." That was the true privacy betrayal, not just exposure, but exploitation. I started seeing the ripple effects offline. A coworker made an offhand comment that mirrored something from her post. An acquaintance messaged me with unsolicited advice. People who had never asked about my life suddenly felt entitled to opinions. She had turned my reality into public property. I pulled back, slowly. I stopped sharing, stopped reacting, stopped giving her new material. And that's when things escalated. She noticed. Her posts sharpened. The tone shifted from reflective to accusatory, from gentle to accusatory. It was like she could sense the source drying up, and she didn't like it. She framed herself as misunderstood, as attacked, as someone being silenced for telling the truth. And I realized something terrifying. She didn't see what she was doing as wrong. In her mind, attention justified everything. If people related, then the ends must justify the means. My boundaries were inconvenient. My discomfort was collateral damage. That's when the tension peaked, that quiet moment before everything breaks. I still hadn't confronted her directly, but I was done pretending. Because once someone convinces themselves that your pain is their platform, they will never stop on their own. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors.
It came quietly, in the form of a notification I almost ignored. Someone sent me a link with a single line of text. "Is this about you?" I knew before I opened it. This time, she didn't hide behind vague language. She still didn't use my name, but she used everything else. The timeline, the city, the specific event I'd begged her to keep private. Anyone who knew me, even casually, could connect the dots. My hands started shaking. As I read, my chest tightened in that familiar way, the one that makes it hard to breathe but impossible to look away. She described my lowest moment like a plot twist. My pain was framed as a lesson, my vulnerability a hook. The comments were worse than before. People took sides. Some praised her for setting boundaries. Others tore the unnamed woman apart. That woman was me. This wasn't just internet drama anymore. This was exposure, public judgment, a complete collapse of trust. The privacy betrayal had reached a point of no return. I closed my phone and sat there in silence. No tears, no rage, just a deep, hollow numbness. I realized then I wasn't grieving the post. I was grieving the person I thought she was, the version of her who cared, who listened, who promised. That person never existed. I confronted her that night, not online, not publicly. I went to her place, because some conversations don't belong on a screen. I told her exactly how it made me feel, calmly, clearly. I didn't accuse, I explained. I said she had crossed a boundary, that this sharenting issue wasn't hers to decide, that my life wasn't her content. She didn't apologize. She sighed. She told me I was controlling her voice, that I was trying to silence her truth, that if people recognized themselves in the story, that wasn't her responsibility. Then she said the sentence that ended everything. "If you didn't want people to know, you shouldn't have told me." That was the moment something inside me broke and hardened at the same time. I walked out without arguing, without tears, without threats. I finally understood the nature of the conflict story she had been telling, and the one she hadn't realized she was creating. Because from that moment on, I stopped trying to be understood. I started paying attention to facts, to timestamps, to contradictions, to the way her stories changed depending on the audience. She thought the confrontation was over, that I would fade into silence and shame. And I did go silent, but not in the way she expected. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. And while she continued posting, convinced she had won the narrative, I was documenting everything, not for revenge fueled by anger, but for clarity, for truth, for the moment when her version of events would no longer hold together. I didn't need to expose her. All I had to do was stop protecting her. Because when someone builds their platform on half-truths, eventually the weight of them becomes too heavy to carry, and cracks always show.
I didn't announce my exit. I didn't block her. I didn't post a single vague quote about betrayal. I just stepped back and let her keep talking. That was the most difficult part for me. Staying quiet while my life was still being reshaped into content, watching the internet drama continue without correcting it. But I understood something crucial. Reacting would only feed the story she wanted to tell. So instead, I became invisible. I stopped answering messages, I declined invitations, I removed myself from shared spaces where she could observe my reactions. No new emotions, no fresh material. The source of her stories quietly disappeared. And that's when the cracks began to form. Without me, her narratives started to stretch. Details became inconsistent, timelines shifted. She reused the same emotional beats again and again. What once felt authentic started sounding rehearsed. People noticed. This is the part no one talks about in a conflict story, how silence changes the power dynamic. When you don't defend yourself, others start listening more closely. When you don't explain, people begin to question. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything: screenshots, archived posts, dates. Not obsessively, methodically. I wasn't planning public revenge. I was protecting myself from further privacy betrayal. Because here's the truth: when someone has already crossed your boundaries once, they will do it again unless consequences exist. Her audience grew, but the tone of the comments changed. Less sympathy, more skepticism. Someone asked why the same friend kept appearing in her stories. Another pointed out contradictions. Another mentioned that sharing someone else's trauma felt unethical. The sharenting issue she had dismissed so easily was starting to follow her. I still said nothing. Offline, something unexpected happened. People who knew both of us began pulling away from her, quietly, without drama. They had seen enough. They didn't need explanations. The pattern spoke for itself. And here's the part that surprised me most. I started feeling lighter. Not because she was losing control, but because I had taken mine back. My life stopped revolving around what she might post next. My story belonged to me again. She, on the other hand, grew louder. Her posts became defensive. She talked about being misunderstood, about how people project, about how truth makes others uncomfortable. She framed herself as the victim of censorship. That's the paradox of internet drama. The more you try to control the narrative, the more fragile it becomes. I didn't need to confront her again. I didn't need to expose her publicly. The audience she built on emotional authenticity was beginning to sense the imbalance, and audiences hate being manipulated. This wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. No callouts, no takedowns, just patience, distance, and the quiet refusal to participate. Because when someone relies on your pain for relevance, the most powerful move is to heal without them. And without realizing it, she was doing the rest of the work herself. Karma didn't arrive with drama. It never does. It showed up as questions. At first, they were subtle, buried in comment sections, framed politely. Someone asked why certain stories sounded familiar. Another asked why the same anonymous friend appeared in different timelines. A third wondered aloud whether consent mattered when telling someone else's trauma. She brushed them off. But once doubt enters an audience's mind, it spreads quietly. Especially in internet drama, where trust is the currency and consistency is everything. One post didn't perform the way she expected, then another. The comments weren't as warm anymore. Less praise, more hesitation. People stopped applauding and started analyzing. They didn't accuse her outright, they didn't have to. They just didn't believe her as easily. That's when the emails came. A collaboration fell through, then another. A brand asked for clarification about content ethics. Someone flagged her account for repeated reports related to a sharenting issue, not because of me, but because others had started connecting the dots. This is how karma works in a digital world, not explosively, structurally. The platform that once rewarded her vulnerability began to ask for accountability. The same audience that praised her honesty now expected transparency, and she couldn't provide it without unraveling the conflict story she had carefully constructed. She posted a long explanation one night, defensive, emotional, framing herself as attacked for telling the truth. But it landed flat. People sensed the imbalance, the missing piece, the other voice that never spoke, mine. And that silence mattered, because I never contradicted her publicly. I never fueled the fire. So when her narrative began collapsing under its own weight, there was no villain to point at, only her choices. Offline, the consequences followed. Invitations stopped, mutual friends kept their distance, not out of loyalty to me, but discomfort with her behavior.
No one likes being around someone who treats private lives like content. The privacy betrayal that once felt invisible had become obvious. She reached out to me then, not to apologize, but to ask if I had said anything. That was the moment I knew karma had fully landed. I told her the truth, calmly, simply. I didn't need to. Because when someone builds a platform on blurred boundaries, eventually people start asking where the lines are, and if you can't answer that honestly, you lose credibility. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt finished. The power she once held over my story was gone, not because I took it back forcefully, but because she lost the right to tell it. Karma didn't ruin her life. It just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own behavior, and that was enough.
When everything finally went quiet, I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt empty. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. For so long, my nervous system had been braced for the next post, the next wave of internet drama, the next reminder of that privacy betrayal. When it stopped, there was space, and space can be unsettling when you're not used to it. I had to relearn what it felt like to exist without being observed. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small, almost boring moments. Drinking coffee without checking my phone, telling a story and stopping halfway, not because I was afraid, but because I chose not to finish it, letting parts of my life stay unfinished, undocumented, and untouched. I realized something important then. Privacy isn't secrecy, it's sovereignty. The sharenting issue taught me that not everyone who listens deserves access. Some people collect stories the way others collect souvenirs, proof that they were close to something meaningful, even if they didn't protect it. I stopped blaming myself for trusting her. Trust isn't a flaw, it's a risk, and risks don't make you weak, they make you human. What changed was my boundaries. I became more intentional with my words, more aware of who was asking questions and why. I no longer mistook curiosity for care. I no longer felt obligated to explain my choices to people who wouldn't hold them gently. That was the real lesson behind the conflict story she created. I also stopped romanticizing exposure. There's a cultural belief that if you don't share your pain, you're hiding, that silence equals shame. But that's not true. Silence can be protection. Silence can be wisdom. And silence can be power. I didn't become colder. I became clearer. I still connect deeply. I still care. But I now understand that intimacy isn't proven by how much you reveal. It's proven by how safely someone holds what you give them. The internet drama faded, as it always does. Attention moved on, trends shifted, new stories replaced old ones. But the impact stayed with me in a way that felt grounding rather than heavy. I got my life back, not the version she told, the real one, messy, imperfect, and mine. And here's the truth I wish more people understood. You don't need to destroy someone to win back your dignity. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to expose anyone to protect yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, say nothing, and live well. Because people who rely on your pain to feel important lose their power the moment you stop feeding them. I used to believe that if someone hurt you publicly, the only way to survive was to respond publicly. Now I know that isn't true. What happened to me started as a privacy betrayal, but it ended as a lesson about choice. I couldn't control what she shared. I couldn't control how strangers reacted. But I could control one thing: whether I would keep living inside a story that was never mine to begin with. Walking away didn't mean I forgave her. It meant I stopped letting her define me. The sharenting issue at the center of this story isn't rare anymore. It's happening quietly every day. Friends turning private conversations into content, family members posting moments that don't belong to them, people confusing honesty with entitlement. And the damage isn't always obvious right away. It shows up later in trust issues, in hesitation, in the instinct to hold back even with people who mean well. That's the cost of modern internet drama. It doesn't end when the posts disappear. If you're listening to this and thinking, I would never let that happen to me, I hope you're right. But if you're thinking, this already did, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not weak for feeling exposed. You're not dramatic for wanting privacy. And you're not wrong for expecting consent. Every conflict story has two sides, even when only one gets told. Silence doesn't erase your truth. It just means you're choosing not to perform it. So before I end this, I want to ask you something, honestly. If someone you trusted shared your most personal moments online without permission, would you fight back publicly, or would you walk away and let their choices speak for themselves? There's no single right answer, but sometimes the quietest response is the one that lasts the longest. What would you have done if you were in my place?